Good afternoon in New York and the Americas. Good evening in Ukraine, Europe, Israel, and Africa. And welcome whatever time of day or night for all who are joining us from all corners of the world. I'm Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma, ICMGLT for short. Thank you very much for joining us, our webinar today. This International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma, commemorative solidarity psychohistorical webinar is held immediately following the anniversary of the Babyn Yar Tragedy. In late September 1941, SS and German police units and their auxiliaries perpetrated one of the largest massacres of World War II. It took place at a ravine called Babyn Yar, or you might have heard it as Babi Yar, just on the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital city of Kyiv. You will learn quite a bit about that from our first presenter. Multidisciplinary experts will examine the cumulative effects of this historically devastating event, and collective traumata and their impacts on succeeding generations and on living there today. This webinar would not have happened if it weren't for the generosity and dedication of ICMGLT's Advisory Council member and chair of the ICMGLT's Working Group on Ukraine, Dr. Irina Frankova. The generosity of our working group members, Drs. Orest Tsuvalo and Oksana Yakushko, and our wonderful interpreters, Anya Stemkovska and Natalia Zaitz. Your moderator, I am a clinical psychologist, victimologist, traumatologist, and psychohistorian. I devoted much of my career to studying, training, and preventing multi-generational impacts of massive trauma, to victims' rights, to rights of future generations, and to reparative justice, that justice that views the justice process, not only the outcome, but the moment-to-moment and the totality of the relationship of the justice systems with the victim, as offering opportunities for and is experienced by the victims as healing and repair. Of course, as you will hear from our superb presenters, history and its politicization too plays a role in the victims and their descendants' experience of justice for the suffering. My version of psychohistory is related as it is dedicated to articulating history as it is lived, rather than as mostly a series of dates and events. Today's first speaker, Dr. Tetiana Pastushenko, is a candidate of historical science, PhD, and a senior research associate at the Institute of History of Ukraine, the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. She is a vice president of the International Mauthausen Committee. Since May 2022, Dr. Pastushenko has scientific scholarships from the Vector Foundation, and from Philipp Schwartz Initiative at Heidelberg University. She is studying civilian victims in Ukraine during the Second World War, prisoners of war, the Nazi occupation, oral history, memory studies. Our second speaker, Dr. Irina Maidan, is a medical doctor specialized in psychiatry and psychotherapy. She works as a researcher at the Institute of Pediatrics, Obstetrics, and Gynecology of the National Academy of Medical Science in Ukraine, Kyiv. As well, she is a wonderful member of ICMGLT's working group on Ukraine. Our last but not least speaker, Mr. Vadim Farber, holds advanced degrees in education and has held leadership roles for over 20 years that focus on building cultures of tolerance, creating vibrant multi-ethnic communities, and serving vulnerable groups such as internally displaced refugees. Since 2015, Vadim has served as director of the Jewish Cultural Center Solomonica, an organization based in Dnipro, which became the largest volunteer and humanitarian service provider for Ukrainians impacted by war. We have an hour and a half for the webinar. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes. Following an interchange among us, I will open the floor to questions and brief comments from the virtual audience. Panelists will then conclude with last words. Please use the chat function and we'll do our best to respond to as many as we can. Please feel free to direct your questions to a particular panelist or to the full panel. We begin with Dr. Tetiana Pastushenko. Tetiana, the screen is yours.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. A great honor for me. It's a great honor for me to speak at this webinar. I want to give short answer to simpler question about history and memory of Babyn Yar. I share my ecran.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, and can you see?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
What is Babyn Yar? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Babyn Yar is the old age name for a ravine in the surrounding area in the city of the Kyiv, where in 19th century a multi-confessional necropolis was created. The 11th century Kirillivska church and
you're freezing
situated on the north side. You can see this photo?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You can view is was Babi Yar in the beginning of the war and the gate of the one of the cemeteries, the Jewish cemeteries. Why does Babyn Yar have global significance? The Babyn Yar gained worldwide notoriety as a result of the mass shooting of Kyiv Jews in 1941. Nearly 34,000 men, women, and children were murdered in the last 2 days of September 1941. This was one of the largest civilian massacres committed by the Nazis during the World War II. Babyn Yar thus became one of the certain symbols of the Holocaust. Jews were not the only one killed and buried in Babi Yar during the war. During the 2 years of German occupation, that lasted until November 1943, group of people and individuals who were also considered racial and political enemies of the Nazis were shot and buried in Babyn Yar. Along with the Jews, the Nazi killed Roma, Red Army prisoners of war, psychiatric hospital patients, civilian hostages, Ukrainian nationalists, and Soviet partisans, and prisoners of the Syretsk camp. In the beginning of August 1943, the prisoners of the Syretsky camp were forced to dig up and burn the bodies of people executed in Babyn Yar. The total number of victims is estimated to be as 100,000, the majority of whom were Jews. Today, Babyn Yar and their nearby cemeteries are part of the public park on the territory of National Historical and Memorial Reserve in the neighboring forest park zone, which need to be maintained and improved. Here's in the photo you can see area of Babyn Yar. It's easily accessible by car and public transport. It's in recent decides dozens of monument and memorial have been erected in this area in chaotic manner, fighting to come together as an as an architectural and landscape ensemble. Babyn Yar is surrounded by residential area, and local youth it for work and the picnic, separate museum or permanent Yar on the Holocaust. Why did this happen? The Stalin's regime first used the issue of Babyn Yar in its international propaganda at the Nuremberg trials, but later chose to silence and other ways to downplay the fact that most of the victims of Babyn Yar were Jews. In the early 1950s, the Soviet excuse me. Soviet government decided to physically wipe out Babyn Yar itself, not just its memory. On the pretext of building highway to connect Kyiv city center with the outskirts, products west from the Petrovsky brick factory was pumped and dumped in Babyn Yar. In March 1961, this mass water and rock broke through the dam and flooded Kurenivka district. Thousands of people died in this so-called Kurenivka disaster. In the 1960s, the communist leadership decided to completely change and develop the area around Babyn Yar. The Jews, Karaite, Muslim, and Orthodox cemeteries were demolished and a short period of time, and their place were built the avant-garde sport complex, a TV broadcast tower, and production center, a Communist Party archive. Only under pressure from local and international civic activists did the Soviet authorities allow a monument to be erected at Babyn Yar. In 1976, they finally opened a monument. There was no mention of Jewish victim in the monument's art or inscription. Shortly following the 1991 proclamation of the Act of Independence of Ukraine, the monument menorah dedicated to Jewish victim was unveiled in Babyn Yar. In the next years, various communities and organizations erected memorial in honor of the different victims of Babi Yar. Thus, more than 35 individual monument, memorial, and installation have appeared. On the other hand, the role of Central Ukrainian government in the process of integration memorialization of Babyn Yar has diminished. In 2017, a special working group was established in the Institute of History of Ukraine that included historians, museum specialists, architects, and lawyers. This team developed the concept with this comprehensive vision of memorialization of Babyn Yar as a unique place of memory. The concept envisages the creation of integration memorial complex, which will consist of Babyn Yar Memorial Park, Babyn Yar Memorial Museum, Ukrainian Holocaust Museum, and the monument and the memorial outside the memorial park. In 2020, funding for the state-owned Babi Yar memorialization project stopped. The office of the new president began to actively support the activities of the private project Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, which was created on the initiative and which funding from Russia oligarchs. Those oligarchs are now under international sanction. Babyn Yar and Russia's war against Ukraine. After Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine, all memorial activities in Babyn Yar ceased. The restoration work on the memorial building of the former Jewish cemetery's office was never complete. On the 1st March 2022, as a result of rocket attack on Kyiv, Russian missiles fell on the territory of the Babyn Yar Reserve, killing 5 people. The generation of the Babyn Yar victims are now physically suffering from the Russia war against Ukraine. They are dying in the front from Russia missile attack, living without electricity and water, leaving their hometown and their country. Nowadays, Babyn Yar and Holocaust are more often mentioned in Ukraine in the context of exposing of the crime of Russia army as a terrible tragedy of humanity that is repeating itself in Ukraine. On 29 September 2023, the multimedia exhibition Babyn Yar Mirror of Death was opened in the National Historical and Memorial Reserve. It tells the story of the way that the Jews of Kyiv passed on their last day on 28 September 1941. At the same time, in numerous mirrors, their views sees a reflection of the fate of victims of other crimes, Stalin's, Nazis, and modern Russia army. And I will say that idea of my speech is to show that the history of Babyn Yar is not only about shooting of Jews on 28 to 30 September 1941. The killing at Babi Yar took place, and Babi Yar, different people, different nationals, took place during the 2 years of Nazi occupation. It is also the story of the physical destruction of Babyn Yar and the fight for its memory and their proper commemoration of the victim of Babyn Yar. It is a complex story that continues to this present day. It is it is story not only about the past, but also about the future. Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Tetiana. I was both last year and this year. I was very moved when I saw President Zelensky attend the commemorations in Babi Yar. So I'm glad you showed that picture. Thank you. Well, our next presenter is Dr. Irina Maidan. My dear Irina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much and good afternoon. I'm going to speak Ukrainian. Thank you for inviting me. That's great honor for me. And it is very important for me to speak about Babyn Yar tragedy, not only because of my civic and professional standpoint, but also because of my personal attitude, because this tragedy directly affected my history and my family. My great-grandfather was executed there, and that had significant consequences. And now, retrospectively, I understand when I'm working as a psychotherapist, I realized that it was not by chance that I chose this profession. I would like to speak about transgenerational trauma. This is relevant in the context of the Babyn Yar tragedy and Holocaust tragedy, and also the war that is ongoing in Ukraine for Ukraine's independence, autonomy, and let's even say for the good. Transgenerational trauma is about transfer of emotional, mental, spiritual, and social suffering that, if not treated, may spread intergenerationally in the family or in communities. Survivors' children who directly are not affected by the horrors survived by their parents do not know what makes them suffer, even though they may link the anxiety with anxieties of their parents, and they take in part of their experience, part of their being. One generation passes over to the other, not only material values, but also psychic elements, traditions, family myths, histories, especially family structure, behavior, and attitudes in the family. The psychic elements that are passed over, inherited, create for the child the so-called heritage or scenario that determines their behavior in various life situations, choice of profession, relationships, lifestyle, and so on and so forth. The role of memory is very important, individual and collective memory. And due to memory, we have history of generations, and the possibility of passing the memory over from one generation to another. And this is the basis that links generations. Within a group and among individuals, there are trends to eliminate painful memories that may create threat for the group in general or for links within the group. And this negative content is negated, repressed, and transformed into secrets. Usually, this is linked with severe traumas and horrible experiences. Intergenerational passing over happens within actual contact. You can see that from a side. So this is what happens in the family. And this is also about extended ancestors, and thus pathological elements are passed over. This is about the situations where ancestors suffered severe psychological trauma. If we speak about Babyn Yar and Holocaust tragedy, we are speaking not just about transgenerational trauma, but about historical transgenerational trauma, because they involved a huge number of people. If a traumatic event is mentally processed, it is built into the individual memory as an experience that gets the status of the past of a memory. And then the here receives not only the content, but also the ways to process that, ways that help to process and thus to ensure individual development. Victims of Holocaust, when they survived, went through those horrible events, they experienced helplessness, humiliation, massive perception of loss, world falling apart, their identity falling apart. And unfortunately, because unfortunately now hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are experiencing the same process. The first generation of victims develop the so-called survivor syndrome. And this impacts the quality of family life relationships and child-parent relationships. They may experience the guilt, and there is the special name, survivor's guilt. They may have depressive states, massive repression, and blocking of emotional experiences. Research proved that about 46% of people who survived Holocaust and were able to develop successful careers and create their families, nevertheless demonstrate
the researchers of the results of the historic trauma paid attention to the role of dissociation of the survivors and the development of alexithymia when the individual is not feeling any emotions, depression, and also consolidation of these manifestations with the symptoms of the PTSR. And thus, the parents or the ancestors who had the PTSR, post-traumatic syndromes, actually demonstrated in the emotional and behavioral area. And they actually send the messages from the places which are related to the traumas. And these messages could be formulated and might have the character of something which has not been worked on, things which could not be manifested as the manifestation of the psyche. And usually these secrets are arranged around these topics. And this is the information which is not allowed to be discussed. And if it is discussed, the stability of the system must be destroyed. But the secret is being transferred through the lack of knowledge. And it's like Pandora box, which has to be not to be opened. And Serge Disseron, the well-known children's psychoanalyst, explains how the secret affects the psyche of the child. Not the family secret if they are nice, but the parents who actually conceal them are perceived by the child as violence, the violence which the child will never forget. And it is a very big load which actually affects its psychic life and is going to affect the lifestyle of the child. If the parents are sure that they will never learn about this secret, the children feel this secret because it is being transferred through intonation, through the body language, through certain specific lexic and vocabulary. And the children feel that their actually understanding is being split, and they understand that parents take a lot of efforts to hide these secrets from the children. And this adaptation of the children become the basis of the problems which are manifested by in other generations. Transgenerational object appears in the first generation as something which is impossible to discuss because the difficult experience is is related to it, pain and shame. And in the second generation, it is also should not be discussed. It is impossible to express it. And in the third generation, people stop thinking about it, and that it's not being perceived at the cognitive level, and the knowledge about thereof is lacking. And in the third generation of the survivors, well, the problems of the psychological and psychic functioning are being most obvious. The next generations become something like a container for the experiences of the previous generations, which were not worked on, and they had to be transferred to their children and grandchildren. And this experience, traumatic experience, could be symbolized in authentic psychomotor and imaginary and verbal. And if the events through which they have survived is symbolic in one modality, but the results might be about the traumas in the psychic health. And not only the survival of the traumas of the previous generations is negative, affecting the future generations, but the number of messages which are transferred by the to the children becomes key. And this is a source of anxiety for the children who do not know what happened in their families, and they didn't get any explanations, demonstrate more symptoms than the others. And I would like to quote now Yael Danieli, and one of her quotes: silence, especially in the adolescence, brings the problems of identity with lack of assurance of itself, and which is mixed with grief. And the adolescence is fluctuating between the ability to develop properly and the feeling of shame and guilt. And the children survive from the separation and lack of individuation, and it is impossible to develop and to live through their own life. And they have the fantasies that it will bring about the loss of the reliance on the parents and the sense of life, and they perceive it as a betrayal. But the parents usually are trying to take too much care about their children, and that's why the children have the exaggerated feeling of the values. When we are talking about the transgenerational historic traumas such as Holocaust and Babyn Yar, so reparation has to be carried out through the social field, because the social traumatism has a level of suppression, and it's very difficult to repair it only within the framework of the individual psychotherapy. And how does the trauma of the generations, intergenerational trauma looks in the patients who come for help? These are the cases when people didn't have in their experience of such events, and such individuals feel anxiety which they don't understand. They are too concerned about their surroundings, and they don't trust the external world. They do not have any sense of trust to the world, and have no sense of the safety and security. They feel the fear of death, and they might suffer from depressions and anxieties, and there might be problems with sleep and nightmares, and there could be problems of addictions, substance addictions and alcohol abuse, and there could be also serious problems in reproductive health without availability of some, physical deficiencies of women. And thus, the cycle of the traumas of the generation lasts until somebody decides to stop the transference of this trauma, asking for the help of the assistance. The specialists in the area of psychological and mental health do not know the history of the patients, so they do not know about the traumatic traumatic events, and they create a unique situation. And that's why it's extremely important for the specialists in the area of mental health and psychological health to understand the cultural context of the individual who are suffering from the traumas, including the trauma which is transferred from the generation to the generation, to provide the efficient and effective and delicate treatment. Thank God that those who have survived the trauma might actually decrease the influence of trauma for the future generations. The traumatic experience can be transferred from one generation to another. The ability to overcome the trauma and to build the resilience could be transferred as well. And this gives hope. And when the family tragedies, which have been kept a secret, stop being this secret, this can become a relief, and it might give the freedom to the next generations. And I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irina. It looks like we moved from Tetiana mentioning how the Soviet system silenced the survivors to in a political and social sense, to Irina focusing how the resulting silence in the family affected future generations. So silence is something extremely important for us to learn from in this area. And of course, the lessons we learn from history, how the past shapes our present and future, and how it is used as well politically and socially, or abused. So these are very important dimensions for us to think about, and to actually listen to everyone's presentations, to deciphering which dimension they are addressing and clarifying and elaborating on. Thank you so much, Irina. And now we open the floor for Vadim. Go right ahead. I'm so excited to hear your presentation now. Please.
Thank you very much, and good evening, good afternoon, and I'm happy to be able to tell you about the history of our center and to look from the angle of the Jewish community to the tragedy of Ukraine, which is evolving in front of us now. What could be more terrible than the war and the loss of the relatives, and what could be worse than that actually go to sleep when your mama lullabies you, and then wake when there are explosions. And on the 24th of February, all Ukrainians have become the victims of an awful war, which lasts almost for the second year, and we do not see the end of it yet.
Most of the country, it was hard to believe that only 80 years later, the horror that our great-grandfathers and mothers recalled with tears in their eyes could happen again in Europe. Now, to me, the stories of my grandparents sound completely different because I have experienced many of the stories firsthand. My daughter, like my grandmother, has the status of a child of war. My family and I, like them, are hiding from bombs in a bomb shelter or in the corridor of our apartment. Our loved ones are dying from shelling or in the battlefield. Unfortunately, history is cyclical, and when it happened again, I think that many Jews were triggered by the genetic memory of the Holocaust, Babyn Yar, and hundreds of other places where Jews were killed simply because they were Jews. Their first decision, like many others, was to flee as soon as possible to prevent history from repeating itself. Many Jewish organizations that were in Dnipro stopped their activities and left the country. However, not everyone did so. There were those who clearly decided to stay, not to flee and to fight. In this case, the genetic memory did not work in terms of saving their lives, but it worked in terms of uniting and confronting the enemy and circumstances. The Jewish community of the city of Dnipro became an example for many people in the city and throughout Ukraine. And with its actions, it gave confidence that this time Jews would not believe that everything would be fine and they would not be affected by the common misfortune, and then pay the terrible price of 6 million dead. Our center was one of those organizations that remained in the city in full from the very beginning of the war. I remember very well how on the 25th of February, a day before it started, I gathered my team and asked them what they were going to do, what their plans were. Almost everyone said, we are staying. This courage and cohesion allowed us not to close down our organization for a single day after the war started. It gave everyone the strength, confidence, and courage in the face of complete uncertainty and fear at the time. And now I will show you a video, what our center looked like before it was affected by the terrible events and what happened since then. Can you see it?
Yes, it's perfect. And they look lovely too.
So activities of our organization before the war, despite the name Jewish Cultural Center, was largely related not only to development of Jewish culture, but also we provided charitable assistance and support for people in difficult life situations. We had experience in 2013 and 14 of working with IDPs, refugees and displaced people from Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And we had experience of working with the poor and people with disabilities. We had a powerful volunteer platform, but all of this was somehow aimed only at the Jewish community, and that is at people who have Jewish roots. On the 25th of February, we believe we made a key decision that we are proud of, and that changed our organization, its activities, and most likely it will change the future of the organization. We decided to expand our mission, and that from now on, we would provide assistance to everyone who needs it, regardless of nationality. That we have a chance to survive this unequal battle only by uniting and working for the same result. Thanks to God, the people of Ukraine were very inspiring with their unity and cohesion. At the beginning, we didn't understand how it would happen. We didn't have a clear plan or strategy as we did before. We only had a desire to do our best to help as many people as possible. We started by restructuring, revising our budget. We organized fundraising, and we used all the resources raised to help people. Gradually, we built a new model of work, who we help, which organizations and volunteer centers we work with. Step by step, we were approaching our goal of helping people in need. And looking at it now, we realize that it worked. We have already provided assistance for more than 50,000 people. We started our journey on February the 28th, when we sent our first evacuation bus that took children, women, and the elderly abroad. Then came the next one and the next one. And so from March to August, we managed to take out, to rescue, evacuate more than 3,000 people. The Almighty gave us strength and did everything to help us do good. So people began to come around who also wanted to help. Some volunteers, without thinking about their own lives, rushed to the hotspots and helped people, taking them to safer cities. Others opened places in those city sites where people could live and have something to eat. Some started distributing food parcels. Everyone around us was trying to do their best to help their neighbors. And the Torah commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, was enacted. Since our human resources were not enough, we decided to support the initiative of such volunteers and help people who had been forced to move, to flee. First thing we did was to take care of a number of shelters in Dnipro where refugees lived, and them on a regular basis we delivered food, hygiene kits, and much more. We even set up a shelter at our center, equipping it to accommodate 30 people. As a result, over the course of a year, we grew into a large volunteer hub that became a place of supporting tens of thousands of people. It helped to evacuate people, provided food, hygiene, diapers, baby food, medicines, and other essentials. Then circumstances brought us together with volunteers for whom we purchased minibuses to take people out of hotspots. One of them was designed to transport bedridden patients and the elderly. We managed to save more than 500 lives in this way. We organized hot meals in Dnipro and Kharkiv and regularly fed up to 600 people a day. And we helped hospitals by purchasing expensive medicines for children, organized field kitchens in liberated territories where there was no electricity, gas, or water supply. We helped IDPs pay for housing and address their individual problems. When Kakhovka HPP was blown up, we sent more than 5,000 tons of water and food to Kherson region with our volunteers. One of our most important achievements was opening 7 psychological support centers for people with PTSD. Dozens of qualified psychologists work at those centers now and provide assistance free of charge. We believe that this is, and for the near future, it is a very serious problem for our society, and we need to start addressing it as soon as possible. Now it is hard to remember everything that we have managed to do and how many people we have helped, but it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is not to stop and continue providing assistance, because after so long, many people get tired of fighting, helping, and this may be a great danger. So we try to do everything we can not to give up, not to continue providing assistance. And it's very important for us to be part of one whole, where we, Jews, citizens of Ukraine, who do not lose their identity, but at the same time stand side by side with Ukrainians against the evil that has come to our common home, and where we, like our ancestors, boldly face fear. We do not run away and we do not give up. And thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Vadim. Thank you for emphasizing unity, the importance of unity and helping each other, especially in difficult times. I'm wondering, going into I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on the issue of silence, and then we come back to to helping each other as a value. I wanted to share with you what I must have shared in the past, which is a comment by a survivor. Some of you know him as a very important psychiatrist, Bruno Bettelheim, that was hanging at the entrance to my office for a long time. And he said, what cannot be talked about, what cannot be put into words, can also not be put to rest. And if it is not, the suffering continues from generation to generation. So this webinar is very much along those lines. We are speaking about difficult past, difficult present, and how to repair, and how to unite in the face of evil as we experience it. I wonder whether you have questions for each other, because we want to have the second phase of our webinar, which is a dialogue among you. Anyone has question for the other? I know there are questions in the audience. We will attend to them in a minute or two. Anyone has a question among you? Any thoughts, any comments to each other's presentation? Tetiana, go ahead, please.
I do have a question to Yael and Irina. Being a historian, I work with the past of people.
With the what of
And,
people?
The past.
Yes.
And when listening to their stories, I record interviews with those survivors of tragic events in the past. I work in the archive. I help them documents about their parents, ancestors, and discover the previous history that was actually prohibited. It could not be shared within the family. So I wonder if maybe unconsciously I am exercising some positive therapeutic process.
Say it again. It sounds very important. Whether you unconsciously, go ahead, Natalia, would you say it again? Or is it Anya? Hello? I actually didn't hear the translation.
So maybe I just guess that, well, I'm not a professional in mental health. I'm not a psychologist. It's just that intuitively, I try to support, to provide assistance to people, right? So I'm not a professional psychologist. So maybe by doing that, I'm doing my own unconscious kind of recovery work.
Absolutely. You see, I'm so glad you asked that. We are all talking about trying to repair the past, trying to repair the wound of the present. And that is a central value of our center. Actually, when we give awards, we call them the Repairer Awards for people who repair. Yes, Tetiana, I often say that even in Auschwitz, a person in one bank had a different experience than a person in another bunk. Each person is unique. And while we want to create generalizations in some fields, we must always remember and be anchored in the particularity of the individual's experiences with. Now, why am I saying that? Because one person who was in a bunk in Auschwitz might not have ever learned, except from historians, about the rest of the world of the Holocaust. Children of survivors might learn in bits and pieces, a little here, a little here, a little here, particularly if silence is the rule. So part of what historians do, and I might say the justice system, when it works reparatively, is to cohere the story, to put it together in a way that is not fragmented, in a way that melts the silence and allows the individual, the family, the group, the community, the nation to understand the past, to know the past, to understand the past, and either prevent it from returning or tragically sometimes repeating it, right, when you don't. So I hope I answered you. Historians do sacred work, there's no question. But of course, each one of us has an unconscious, and historians or therapists or community organizers and many professionals, judges, have their own biases too, right? And part of what we need to do is to also learn ourselves as the person who puts these things together, these horrible facts together, or cohering the story, that we don't enter our own bias into it. So there's so much work for us to do. As you see, we try to bring people from different professions together because each one, of course, has their own total contribution, right, to this wound of history. Yes, please, Irina.
To add, to elaborate about that regarding the therapeutic content and sense of Tetiana's work. I believe it is very important because when in your psyche you have this kind of holes, our unconscious fills them in with some phantoms and fantasies, ideas, while information which is historically based, historical facts, that's something that helps us like recover or repair these gaps with facts. And that makes it possible to for an individual to calm down, to feel more reassured when there are no secrets. That is why working with archives, with genealogy, it is so important to look for those facts, if that's possible. And also somebody wrote in the chat, I don't see that, about how to work on that. A psychotherapist in the course of therapy does the same thing. And we even ask our patients, please, if you have your ancestors who are still alive, go and talk to them, because the problem is when there is no longer anyone to talk to, of course. So I believe that this is incredible what you are doing.
Absolutely. And Tetiana, please, we can see you once.
And there was the question in the chat about police persons who participated in executing Jews. So what about those people who have traumatic past, which is not positive, meaning, I mean, children of those who committed crimes, of perpetrators? That's also important, of course, but this is about ancestors. It is important to recognize the past as it was. I mean, then it is possible to proceed with grieving, with redemption, and with separating from those who were in the past. I'm not my father, I'm not my grandfather, I'm a different individual. But it is important to know the truth and to avoid, again, these dark gaps inside.
Yeah, without the truth, we're lost. We're totally lost. So that has to be the rock on which we stand and from which we look and study. Vadim, what about you? What you did? What you
First
did?
of all, I am very...
Go ahead.
First of all, I am very glad that I could hear this outstanding and this very interesting opinions. Irina, I really admire this perspective of psychology and aspects of this profession. That's important because I have a child, and it is important because I understand that no matter what I do, my child will suffer the implications or consequences. And the more information I have to further on help her, that's of course very important for me. And I'm great that I was invited to participate today. And Yael, my special words of admiration and gratitude to you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, and me to you. I was reflecting yesterday, and this is so interesting within the horrible realities of today, how goodness happens, and how even repair of the past, repair of mutual difficult past, as you have presented. I was reflecting on two commandments that are the core commandments of Judaism, according to Rabbi Hillel. You all know them, but you actually saw them fulfilled today in the presentations. You know, the one that says, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." You know, and it was shared widely, not just in widely beyond Judaism, and also, and it says that it's the central commandment of Jewish knowledge. So if you know that, you know, the rest is up for interpretation. And of course, another commandment that we heard fulfilled today, that some of you, I'm sure you know, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So I have so much admiration for the work that each one of you is doing, and Vadim for you know, for what you've done, what you've turned the center into. It shines, I'm sure. It makes the lives of many a little easier. Even if a little easier, it's better, right? Whatever we can do. I wonder if it's okay to open the floor with you to open the floor, even though you already reached out to the chat and responded to some. There was a question in the question and answer that was in Ukrainian. Would Natalia or Anya please translate it for us? Not in
the question is
in the question and answer. And there was a lot of talking in Ukrainian that please do translate it so all of us share the wisdom.
The question in Q&A is this. The question is addressed to Irina, how to uncover the secret that you mentioned and how to work with it. And I believe that Irina has already addressed this question. When we see that patient has strange and non-related to personal experience phenomena, we think about certain alien or this kind of experience that we are describing. That's what we have in Q&A.
It's a very easy question. That's the whole field of trauma psychology. Thank you for that question. There are also a lot of interchanges on the chat in Ukrainian. Please do us a favor and translate to the non-Ukrainian speakers. Do us a favor and translate.
Okay, so to the first comment from Mordechai, from Daria. So these are some organizational comments then from Irina Frankova. She says that the participants will be able to have to receive the recording of the webinar. And then there is exchange in English regarding policemen and stuff. And I believe that further on that's in English. Then Alexander commented, read Jonathan Little. It is very difficult to read about those events that he describes, and it must have been very difficult to be participants of those events. Then words of gratitude to all the speakers.
Just a moment, because we will forget some. So it is a very simple answer to the recording question. Absolutely. Each registrant automatically receives the recording after the webinar. Also, the recordings exist, the recordings of all of our webinars, quite a few of which relate to Ukraine, are on our website. So please visit and learn. See, I already forgot the second one. Please go ahead.
Just the reference to book by Jonathan Little, The Good Makers or something like that. And then that
sorry, I didn't get that.
A reference to Jonathan Little's book as a recommendation to read this book. It describes events of Babyn Yar, I understand. Then words of gratitude.
Wait. Is the in what language is the book?
I don't know. Shall we ask the participant?
Yes, please. It's very important for our center to have as many as possible references in our library. We have a library dedicated to multi-generational legacies of trauma in every profession, in every field, anywhere from a scientific reference to a poem or a film. So please, if there's anything related, write to us. so we can put it in the library, and the language doesn't matter, except if it's not in English, please add an abstract in English so the English readers can at least know what it's about. But what is the book about? You said about the history of Babyn Yar. This is from, I can't read the name, it's in Ukrainian.
It's Jonathan Little, the beneficiaries, the benefactor. Mhm.
So Jonathan,
very-
please make sure to send us the name of the book and about it. Thank you. Go ahead, what would be? I see Irina, you wrote, do you want to say, Irina, Irina Frankova? Rabbi, would you give access to Irina Frankova? You have quite a few comments, please. Irina? Rabbi, are you there?
Yes, I'm trying to get her in.
Okay. If Irina would speak, then Orest, if you want to say a few words, there are all working group members, and maybe you will join too, Vadim and Tetiana, who knows? And there was at the very beginning, there was a question from I think during Tetiana's presentation from Mordechai Kamel. Are you there still, Mordechai?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you speak first? Go ahead.
Well, I mean,
Your question came at the very beginning.
my question was during the historical aspect, and the historical aspect, to my mind, is that much like in other countries that was pointed out to me, without collaboration from the local population, these crimes couldn't have been committed. And that in Lithuania and Latvia, Poland, Ukraine, that in order to commit these crimes, the Nazis they began by using the police forces.
Tetiana, can you comment on that, please?
If there is time, I would like to comment it in a nutshell. If you've paid attention to it, I was not talking about the criminals. I was talking about the tragedy at large, but this does not mean that there are no research and there are no research which is being done by the Ukrainian historians who research the issues of collaboration, who participated in the Nazi crimes and in the Soviet crimes as well. Because the technology of reporting existed in the occupied Kyiv during the occupation of Kyiv by Nazis, and this technology actually was used in 20s and 1930s during the Soviet power, were actually reporting on their neighbors and benefited from it quite often. So this sort of attitude existed in the society previously, and thus they were trying to get rid of the neighbors and the people whom they did not like, or just wanted to get some benefits from it, or even without getting any benefit. And at present, during the present times, while we are researching this issue, because the archives, Ukrainian archives, are open, and the archives of the Soviet KGB archives are also open for the researchers, and we can work with the documents and with the criminal cases against the former police police members or the people who worked in the Nazi security services, and those people who were actually punished after the victory of the Soviet army. And actually, I would say that rank and file police collaborators were punished much more and much more seriously than the Nazis who came back to Germany, and sometimes they avoided any punishment or were imprisoned for maybe 3 to 5 years. But in the Soviet Union, those who collaborated with the police were either executed and they got death sentences, or they were sent to the concentration camps of the Soviet Union for 25 years period. So the question of collaboration in the political plane and in the public space, the question of collaboration has been hushed down as well. It was silenced as well during the Soviet times. If we look at the documents of the Soviet justice and the Soviet KGB, we would say that those collaborationists were punished 100%, because after the war, the Soviet labor camps were full of people who were collaborating with the Nazi authorities, or some of them simply found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there were a lot of cases in those days. And now we can give answers to a lot of questions, including the questions of who could be asked by the relatives, who can find out the information about their relatives, what they were doing during the war and whether they were perpetrating or not. And there is an opportunity to get this information to the members of the families at present.
And when we study multi-generational legacies of trauma, we also study children of perpetrators, and not only of perpetrators, but also of collaborators and of victims, to get the full picture of the legacies, because they, of course, have legacies as well. And we want to know if they're similar, different. There's so much work to do, isn't there? Orest or Irina, do you want to say a few words? Orest, please, dear. Orest is one of my best teachers. Orest? Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, and it's a big pleasure to be here, and thank you, Yael, for organizing a very interesting and useful discussion, and thank you speakers, Tetiana, Irina, and Vadim, for amazing presentation. So I don't know how to say, but how to express my gratitude for your speeches, but it's amazing because Tetiana gave a framework of the problem. Irina, like discussion about the solving the problem as a way how to deal with it, and Vadim shared experience how we deal now with the nowadays challenges and with the Russian occupation. And returning to the Tetiana explanation, I would like also to maybe mention that in camps in Soviet time, there were also a lot of Ukrainian people who fought against Russian occupation for independence of Ukraine. Sometimes Russians and Soviet propaganda shared information about them as about Nazis collaborants. So a fight of Ukrainian people for Ukrainian independence is very complicated, especially in the 20th century. So I think this discussion is a good way to make the open dialogue or open discussion about the troubles, about the importance of investigations, and about the importance to recognize the tragedy of different population, of different people, Jewish, Ukrainians, Roman people. And I think this is a good way to deal with this and to work with trauma consequences, to be stronger together, to be stronger united. And one more time, thank you, Vadim, for your experience in Dnipro, because I know this Jewish community is very strong support in Ukraine, in the front line, in the humanitarian aid, and I think that only together we could be stronger against Russian aggression now, and also investigate in the past, to know more about the past and to better understand the past to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Orest, and thank you also for mentioning the Roma. I urge all of you to attend our webinar this Thursday at the same time at 1 o'clock. The announcement will come immediately at the end of this webinar. There is a film to watch that you can watch from today till Sunday night. And the webinar will be on this film. It's about a Roma survivor who underwent Mengele experiments in Auschwitz, and his reflection. And we have, as you will see in the announcement, the filmmaker, her son, who is an artist who wrote a symphonic creation about this experience. They are all Roma. And Hugo's, the survivor's grandson, who will also be with us. So please join us for that too, since they're suffering at the same time period is immense, and we should all also know about that and reflect about that. Irina, would you like to say anything, please? Oh, she left. Okay, so I thank her. We formally thank her again for all her work as a chair of the working group. And I promised everyone that each of the presenters will say last words for today only, because you will come back and we'll have more last words. Also, in response to what Orest suggested, and perhaps Tetiana, you can formally suggest to the Institute that maybe we can do a meeting together. I think that would be absolutely excellent to learn about what we learned from history and how it, okay, including silence. So please convey our formal invitation. But last words, Vadim, you were last, so why don't you do it first? What's your last word today? Vadim, please put the...
Ну, мабуть, я почну. Ну, насправді,
Well, I will start, if I may. My thoughts are not far away from here, but my thoughts are about today. Well, I was not able to join our rehearsal a couple of days ago because I attended the seminar where we, together with the colleagues, were discussing the project about recording the interviews with the Ukrainian refugees. And I was thinking how much work the mental psychologists are going to have with the current trauma and current traumatic experience. My colleagues were recording the interviews with the people who have overcome this trauma and worked on this trauma, and they agreed to get interviewed and they were able to talk to people. But it is even difficult to imagine the number of people who are traumatized and they are not going to attend and apply for the psychiatric assistance or the mental health specialist assistance, and they're not going to share their stories with the people, with the strangers. I was thinking about these traumas. I am completing my work on the compendium of the documents, which is dedicated to Babyn Yar, and this book is dedicated to also the concentration camp, Serets concentration camp, which was close to Babyn Yar. And we were not able to complete this work with my colleagues due to the full-fledged Russian aggression into Ukraine. But only now I was able to sort of start thinking about it and go back to my work and actually reading the minutes and protocols of the interrogation by the Soviet investigators. I was thinking about the tragic destinies of these people and traumatic destinies of these people. And it's very interesting how their posterity were able to overcome these traumas and how they are living now, actually knowing the stories about the people who were killed in the Babi Yar and Serets concentration camp, or those who have survived it. So I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this seminar, and everything I've learned during today's discussion will help me in my current work.
Wonderful. Vadim, would you like to follow?
First of all, I would like to wish all of us peace, so that peace comes to Ukraine as soon as possible. It is very important for all of us to understand that while this aggression is continuing, going on, we cannot just stand aloof from this aggression. We have to do important things, no matter how small they are. So I would like to call on you not to succumb, to continue struggling and fighting. And I am sure that there will be a moment when we will be able to go back home, especially those who had to leave their homes, and so that we will be able to come back to our beautiful country, enjoy life. And I wish that the sufferings which this generation is looking through will, as little as possible, affect the life of our posterity, of the future generation. So I would like to wish you peace and well-being. And thank you very much for this webinar. It was cool.
Dear Irina.
I am constantly think about what was going on and happened with the Jewish people and what's going on with the Ukrainians now. And I look about these two parallel, sufferings, and I don't want to think differently about it. We have, unfortunately, a lot of experience, a lot of stories. We have a lot of research works, and I believe that we have to use, it's our obligation to use this knowledge so that the next generation will be able to be more resilient and to know about this situation, to live, to enjoy life, but not to forget where from the tragedies might come. I am thinking about resurrection, about regeneration, and this is what I am wishing. And I'm talking about it, and somehow I'm become very militant. My militant spirit comes up in my soul. So I would like to wish all of us victory so that it happens as soon as possible and peace really comes as soon as possible. And I would like to thank you very much. And it was especially pleasant to meet new people, colleagues, very interesting people and colleagues. It was nice meeting all of you, and I am happy to be able to meet you. Thank you, Yael.
Yeah, and this is the ideal of our center, right? To bring people together and to continue the discussions, to dig the truth and let it shine the future. So future generations will not have to suffer and to continue the cycle of suffering. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Each one of you, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch and work together. Thank you.